I always wanted to work in places where most people wouldn't go. The high desert, the deep shafts, the plateau country where the air was thin and the ground was honest. After 19 years of mine inspection work, I'd gotten pretty good at reading what the rock was trying to tell me. On Tuesday morning, 4 days after the collapse, I was alone at the Shaft 7 access mouth, doing the kind of assessment I could do in my sleep by that point. Core samples, displacement measurements, crack propagation mapping along the upper bore wall. The drill bit went into the rock. I watched the readout. I recorded the numbers in my field notebook. It was routine work, the kind that kept a mine running or told you when to shut it down. The context of where I was doing it, that was less routine. 4 days earlier, a detonation had collapsed the ventilation tunnel running parallel to the shaft. The mine authority in Santiago had authorized a partial evacuation the morning after. 9 buses and 4 company trucks had taken 200 of Cerro Yucai's 208 workers down the 40-kilometer unpaved access road toward Calama, the nearest city of any size, roughly 200 kilometers from the mine. I'd stayed behind with 7 others, a skeleton crew to keep the diesel generator compound running, maintain the bore integrity of Shaft 7, and wait for the repair crew that was supposed to arrive by helicopter within 48 hours. The repair crew had not arrived. The satellite phone had been showing 1 signal bar for 3 days without completing a single call. I didn't let that stop me from doing my job. I'd worked blast zones and flood risk bores and 3 separate structural failures in my career, and I understood that the Atacama Desert wasn't trying to kill me personally. It was simply a desert at 3,200 meters of elevation, with no water, no road cover, and a temperature swing of 40 degrees between noon and midnight. It would kill me as impersonally as it killed everything else if I stopped paying attention. So I paid attention. I recorded my readings in the field notebook with the same care I'd given every report for 19 years. The bore wall was stable. The cracking was within expected displacement parameters. The collapsed fill at the tunnel junction was dense and dry. These were good numbers. They told me the shaft mouth wasn't going anywhere. My sample drill struck metal at 1.2 meters of depth. I stopped and pulled the drill bit out, looking at the readout to make sure I'd read it correctly. Metal, not rock, not ore, not the rebar reinforcement from the tunnel supports. Those were mapped and I wasn't drilling anywhere near them. This was something else. I set down the drill and grabbed my short-handled excavation pick. I didn't assume it was anything. I just dug. The collapsed fill came away easily, dry and loose, and after about 20 minutes of careful work, I had exposed enough of the object to get my hands around it. I pulled it free and sat back on my heels, holding it. It was a steel document cylinder, about 35 centimeters long and 8 centimeters in diameter, the kind of waterproofed case used by military survey teams to transport field maps in conditions that would destroy paper. It was sealed with a rubber gasket that had compressed and dried but not failed. The exterior was pitted and stained with deep reddish mineral bleed, the specific iron sulfate discoloration that took decades to accumulate in this substrate. I recognized it immediately because I'd documented it on bore wall samples many times over the past 4 years. That staining didn't happen fast. It was the kind of thing that built up over a long time in the presence of groundwater and mineral leaching. I turned the cylinder in my hands, feeling the weight of it, and understood without needing to say it out loud that this had not been dropped here during the collapse 4 days ago. This had been in the shaft wall for a long time, possibly a very long time. I carried it back to the site office without opening it. The walk between the shaft mouth and the prefabricated operations building on the edge of the plateau took about 10 minutes. The midday heat was airless and flat, the kind of heat that didn't feel hot until you realized you'd stopped sweating. The desert in every direction was white salt pan and bare rock, running out to the horizon in a way that made distance hard to judge. I'd gotten used to it over 4 years. Most people didn't. The operations building was a long rectangular prefab with corrugated metal siding and 3 small windows. My office was at the far end, next to the equipment storage room. It wasn't much. A desk, a filing cabinet, a corkboard on the wall with the site maps pinned to it, and a single electric fan that ran off the generator compound. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and set the sealed cylinder on the desk. Then I turned on the fan. I opened the cylinder at my desk with the door closed and the single electric fan running because the room was airless and hot at midday. The rubber gasket had compressed and dried but not failed, and I worked it loose carefully, a little at a time, turning the cap counterclockwise until it came free in my hand. Inside, sealed in oilskin wrap, was a hand-drawn map of the Shaft 7 bore system. I spread it on the desk and began reading it against the engineering blueprints I had been working from for 4 years. The match was exact. The bore geometry was right. The service level platforms at 200, 400, and 600 meters were all marked in their correct positions. The lateral drift tunnels at 350 and 580 meters were there, with their angles and dimensions noted in the margins. The processing cavern at 800 meters was drawn with the same proportions I had measured myself during my first month at Shadowpeople. The annotations were in Spanish in a careful hand, using measurement conventions and notation styles I recognized as consistent with Chilean state mining survey practice from the 1960s. I could date it that way, approximately, the same way I had dated the cylinder's mineral staining. Whoever had drawn this map had been working from the same standards I had learned in my training just 40 years earlier. I worked through the map systematically, cross-referencing each level against my own blueprints. Everything matched. The shaft diameter was correct to within a centimeter. The platform spacing was accurate. The drift tunnel orientations were exact. Whoever had made this map had been down in the shaft, or had worked from survey data that was more precise than anything I had seen in the official archive. Then I reached the bottom of the map. At a depth of 1,040 meters, 60 meters below the current shaft floor at 980 meters, there was a level marked and labeled. The label read, Nivel Cerro. I sat with the map for a long time. The fan turned. The room was hot. I read the label again. Nivel Cerro. Level 0. There was no level 0 in any blueprint, survey document, or operational record I had ever seen for Shaft 7 or for Cerro UK. The shaft floor was at 980 meters. That was the bottom. That was where the bore ended, where the processing equipment sat, where the ore hoists ran up to the surface. There was no level below it. But the map showed one. I leaned back in my chair and stared at it. The handwriting was neat and precise, the same hand that had annotated the rest of the map. This was not a mistake. This was not a smudge or a misplaced mark. Someone had drawn this level deliberately, at a specific depth, with a specific label, Nivel Cerro, and they had buried the map in the shaft wall long enough for decades of iron sulfate staining to accumulate on the cylinder. I thought about the collapse 4 days earlier. I thought about the ventilation tunnel that had been sealed and the communications relay that had been destroyed. I thought about the satellite phone that had been showing one signal bar for 3 days without completing a single call. I thought about the repair crew that was supposed to arrive within 48 hours and had not arrived. Then I picked up my phone and photographed every centimeter of the map. I took close-ups of the annotations, the measurements, the label at the bottom. I took wide shots of the full bore system. I took a photograph of the cylinder itself, with its mineral staining and its intact rubber gasket. When I was done, I had 47 photographs stored on my phone. I locked the cylinder in the bottom drawer of my desk, pockets my phone with the photographs, and walked out of the site office into the midday heat. I found Victoria outside the operations building, checking the fuel lines on the backup generator. She was crouched beside the housing with a wrench in one hand, her high-vis vest catching the late afternoon sun. When she heard my boots on the gravel, she looked up, and I could tell from her expression that she knew I had something to show her. I didn't say anything. I just pulled out my phone and handed it to her. She took it and scrolled through the photographs slowly. The hand-drawn map, the bore geometry, the annotations in Spanish, the label at 1,040 meters, Nivel Cerro. She didn't ask me where I'd found it or when. She just looked at each photograph twice, her thumb moving across the screen with the same careful precision she used when inspecting rope harnesses or checking pressure gauges. Then she handed the phone back to me and stood up. "Multiple workers reported vibration," she said. "Night shift, over the past 2 years, always from below the shaft floor." I waited. "Not seismic noise," she continued. "Not machinery resonance. Rhythmic, regular, low, felt through the boot soles and the handrails on the lower platforms." She paused, looking past me toward the plateau's edge where the sun was starting to sink. "I attributed it to volcanic substrate resonance. The Atacama sits on geothermal basement rock. Resonant cavities aren't uncommon." "But you didn't believe that," I said. She looked back at me. "I wrote it off," she said. "Multiple workers. Independently. Same description every time. I wrote it off." The way she said it made it clear she was admitting something she had known was wrong at the time but had chosen not to pursue. I understood that impulse. I had written off plenty of things myself over the years. Readings that were slightly outside parameters but not enough to halt operations. Structural anomalies that fell within acceptable tolerances. You make those calls because you have to keep the site running. You make them because the alternative is to shut everything down every time something feels wrong, and you can't do that. But this was different. "Did you hear it yourself?" I asked. She nodded once. 3 in the morning, 600-meter platform. I was doing a routine safety inspection. I felt it through the handrail first, then through the floor. Regular interval, patient, like something breathing. She stopped there and didn't elaborate. I didn't press her. "We should compare the map against the original survey archive," I said, "in the morning." She agreed. We went back to our separate dormitory blocks as the sun set over the plateau, and I lay on my bunk in the dark, listening to the wind against the prefab walls and thinking about the hand-drawn map and the label at 1,040 meters. That night passed without incident. The next morning, Liam Kim did not show up for the 6 o'clock equipment check. Liam was 26, a drill operator from Antofagasta, the youngest member of the skeleton crew. He was the kind of person who slept through alarms and left things half done, but was good at his job when he showed up to do it. Victoria went to his dormitory block first, assuming he had overslept. She came back 15 minutes later and found me at the operations room terminal. "His bunk is empty," she said. "Made. Not slept in. Made with the kind of tidiness that looks wrong." I understood what she meant. A bunk made by someone who had gotten up deliberately, not someone who had rolled out of bed half asleep and pulled the blanket up as an afterthought. "His boots are gone," she added. "His phone is on the shelf." I pulled up the camp's motion sensor logs on the terminal. The system tracked every keycard entry and exit at the site's access gates, a security measure required by the mining authority after a contractor had died of exposure 3 years ago when he wandered off-site during a night shift and wasn't found for 2 days. Liam's keycard had been used at the Shaft 7 access gate at 2:18 in the morning. The gate had not been closed since. Victoria looked at the timestamp and then looked at me. "He's been down there for 4 hours, she said. We grabbed flashlights and rope harnesses from the equipment locker and descended the service ladder to the 200-meter platform. The ladder was steel mesh bolted to the shaft wall every 3 meters, with safety rungs every 10. It took us 20 minutes to reach the platform in the darkness, our flashlights cutting narrow beams through the still air of the bore. Liam was seated with his back against the rock wall, legs extended in front of him, eyes open. He was breathing, shallow but regular. His hands were in his lap. In his left hand, he was holding a small figurine, roughly 7 centimeters tall, carved from what appeared to be copper ore, shaped into a seated human form. His right hand was pressed flat against the rock wall beside him, palm down, as though he had leaned against it for balance and then stopped moving. Victoria called his name. He didn't respond. I crouched in front of him and checked his pupils with the flashlight beam, reactive, tracking the light as it moved across his face, but not fixing on anything in the room, not fixing on me. His eyes followed the beam, present but not conscious. His mouth was dry and clean, no chemical smell, no sediment, no signs of ingestion. Victoria reached down and lifted his right hand away from the wall to check his wrist for a pulse. She stopped. The rock behind his palm was warm, not the warmth of a hand that had been pressed against stone for hours, warm from inside, a dry, even heat radiating outward from the rock itself, from deeper in. I pressed my own palm flat against the same surface and felt it immediately. The kind of warmth that comes from something alive, something generating heat on the other side of a thin barrier. The rock was not conducting heat from Liam's hand, it was producing heat of its own. I pulled my hand away and looked at Victoria. She was still holding Liam's wrist, her fingers on his pulse point, her face unreadable in the flashlight's backscatter. "We need to get him to the surface," she said. We got Liam into a rope harness and hauled him up the service ladder one platform at a time, taking turns supporting his weight while the other climbed. He didn't resist. He didn't help. He moved when we moved him and stayed still when we stopped, his eyes open the entire time, tracking the motion of our flashlights, but never settling on either of our faces. At the surface, we laid him on a cot in the operations building, in the small side room we used for first aid and equipment storage. Victoria pulled off his boots to check his feet for injuries or swelling. She stopped again. The boot soles were worn through completely, the rubber abraded down to nothing, the sock beneath visible through the sole. Not worn thin over weeks of use, worn through, as though he had walked for days on abrasive rock without stopping. He had been gone for 4 hours. I looked at the figurine still resting in Liam's left hand. His fingers were curled loosely around it, not gripping, just holding. The copper had a dull sheen in the overhead light, and the surface was covered with engravings, radial lines extending from the figure's center outward, precise and deliberate. The same notational marks as the annotations on the hand-drawn map from the cylinder. I didn't say that out loud to Victoria. I didn't need to. She was looking at the figurine and then at me, and her expression told me she had already seen it. She had already made the connection. We stood on either side of Liam's cot in the operations building, the figurine with its radial line engravings resting in his open hand between us, neither of us speaking. The repair crew still had not arrived by Thursday morning. I stood in the operations room with the satellite phone in my hand, watching that single bar flicker on the display without connecting, and I made the decision that we could not wait anymore. Victoria was checking on Liam when I found her. He was still on the cot where we had left him, breathing shallow and regular, his eyes tracking something neither of us could see. The copper figurine we had taken from his hand was sitting on the desk beside him. I had locked it in a drawer twice. Both times I came back and found it sitting there in the open. I told Victoria we should drive to the highway junction, 40 kilometers down the access road where the convoy should have made the turnaround. There might be a mobile relay station left by the company or by emergency response teams. Someone should have scrambled by now. We needed to reach someone. She nodded without asking questions. We took water, the map cylinder, my notes. We left Liam breathing on the cot with the door to the operations building propped open so the air would move through. The utility truck started on the first try. That felt like a small mercy. We drove south on the unpaved access road with the sun climbing behind us and the salt pan white on both sides. The road was rutted and washboarded from years of heavy vehicle traffic, and the truck rattled over it at a pace that would have been faster if I had been willing to destroy the suspension. I was not. I kept it steady at 40 kilometers per hour and watched the dust plume rise in the rearview mirror. Victoria did not speak for the first 20 minutes. Then she said, very quietly, that she thought Liam had walked a long way while he was gone. The soles of his boots had been worn through completely, down to the sock. He had been gone for 4 hours. I said I knew. She asked if I thought the others from the convoy had walked back to the mine. I said I did not know. She went quiet again after that. We found the convoy at the 22-kilometer mark. I saw the first bus before I understood what I was seeing, just a shape on the road ahead, parked on the right shoulder. Then another behind it. Then another. 9 buses and 4 company trucks, pulled off in a single line, evenly spaced, as neat and deliberate as a formation drill. I slowed the truck and stopped 30 meters back. Every door was open, every single one. I shut off the engine. The silence came in hard and immediate. No wind, no birds, just the faint ticking of the cooling engine and the flatness of the salt pan stretching away on both sides. Victoria got out without saying anything. I followed. The buses were company vehicles, the same type that ran the site rotations every 2 weeks, old Chilean manufactured coaches with high clearance for unpaved roads and bench seating for 25 people each. The paint was faded and dusty. The windows were closed. The doors hung open like mouths. I walked to the first bus and looked inside, luggage still in the overhead racks. A jacket draped over one of the seats. A water bottle in a cup holder, half full. A phone sitting in the seat cubby where someone had left it, screen dark. I walked the length of the convoy, checking each vehicle. All of them the same. Doors open, belongings left behind, no one inside. The handbrakes were set. The keys were still in the ignitions. The fuel gauges showed half tanks or better. Victoria was standing at the 4th bus, looking into the open luggage bay beneath the passenger compartment. Suitcases and duffel bags stacked neatly inside, untouched. She did not say anything. She did not need to. I kept walking. The road beyond the convoy was smooth and undisturbed. No footprints in the fine dust along the shoulder. No scuff marks, no dragged bags, no debris. Just the road running south toward the highway junction, empty and pale under the morning sun. I turned and looked at the desert on both sides. White salt pan, flat and unbroken, running to the horizon in every direction. 200 people had been on this convoy. There was nothing to show where they had gone. I walked back to the lead bus. The driver's logbook was sitting on the dashboard, open, a pen clipped to the top of the page. I recognized the format immediately. The same log system every company driver used. Date and time in the left column, notes in the right. Fuel stops, rest breaks, anything worth recording. The last entry was dated 2 days after the evacuation. The timestamp read 23:47, 11:47 at night. The handwriting was steady and careful. The letters formed with the same blocky precision as every other entry on the page. It said, Nivel cero, escucho, volvemos. Nivel cero, I hear it. We are going back. I stood there with the logbook in my hands. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, dry from the desert air. The ink was dark and clean. I read the entry 3 times as though reading it again might change what it said. 200 people had gotten off these buses in the middle of the night, 22 kilometers from the mine, and walked back, not in panic, not scattered, together, deliberately. I put the logbook back on the dashboard exactly where I had found it and walked back to the truck. Victoria was already there, standing by the passenger door with her arms crossed. She looked at me and I looked at her, and I said we needed to go back to the camp right now. She got in without asking why. I drove faster on the return. The truck bounced hard over the washboard ruts and the suspension groaned, but I did not slow down. Victoria braced one hand on the ceiling grip and did not tell me to ease off. The dust plume behind us rose high and white, and we did not look back at it. When we reached the plateau, the dormitory blocks were empty. I checked Liam's cot first. He was gone. The figurine was gone from the desk. The door was still propped open how I had left it, but the room was empty and the air inside was hot and still. Victoria checked the other dormitories, moving quickly from room to room, calling names. No one answered. I already knew where they were. We found them at Shaft 7. All 6 of them, Liam and the 5 other skeleton crew members who had stayed behind when the convoy left, standing at the shaft mouth in a loose semicircle facing the open bore. Their eyes were open. They were breathing. They were perfectly still. Each one of them was holding a copper figurine in their cupped hands. Victoria walked up to the nearest one, a drill technician named Campos who I had worked with for 3 years. She stood directly in front of him and snapped her fingers in front of his face. He did not blink. He did not move. His chest rose and fell in shallow, regular breaths, and his eyes tracked nothing. I looked past them, toward the ground around the shaft mouth. There were figurines everywhere, not a handful, not a dozen, dozens, arranged on the ground in a wide arc around the bore opening, all of them upright. I started counting and stopped at 40. They were all identical, 7 centimeters tall, seated, copper, with the radial line engravings cut into their surfaces in the same pattern I had seen on the figurine Liam had been holding when we found him at the 200-meter platform. More than 6 people could have produced in 4 days, even if they worked continuously. Possibly more than 6 people could have produced at all, given the precision of the carving. I walked past the shaft mouth toward the generator compound. The generators were still running when I reached them. I could hear the low diesel thrum from 50 meters out, the sound I had been hearing as background noise since the day I arrived at Cherokee 4 years ago. But something about the sound was wrong, thinner. I got closer and understood why. Only one generator was running. Generator 1, the primary unit, was still on and functional. Generators 2 through 6 were silent. I checked the fuel lines. They had been disconnected, not torn, not cut, but carefully unthreaded at the coupling joints. The fuel from their tanks had been drained. I followed the dark stain on the ground and saw where it led. A shallow channel had been dug in the compacted earth, running from the generator compound in a straight line back toward Shaft 7. The diesel had been poured into the channel. It ran all the way to the shaft mouth, a thin, dark line across 50 meters of open ground, ending at the edge of the bore. Generator 1 had been left running deliberately. Someone had wanted the lights on in the dormitory blocks. Someone had wanted the ventilation blowers running in the upper shaft. I walked back toward the operations building. Victoria followed without speaking. The door to the operations room was open. I knew I had locked it before we left. I pushed it and stepped inside. The Shaft 7 blueprints had been pulled from the filing cabinet and spread across every table. Not stacked, not folded. Spread flat, edge to edge, covering every horizontal surface in the room. They had been annotated in pencil. Corrections to the bore geometry, revised depth measurements, adjustments to the drift tunnel angles that were more precise than anything I had ever recorded. At the bottom of every sheet, in the same handwriting, the same notation, 1,040 meters. Abierto ahora. 1,040 meters, open now. I walked slowly around the room, looking at each sheet. The handwriting was small and careful and maddeningly familiar. I had seen it somewhere before. On the convoy logbook, maybe, or on one of the skeleton crew's shift reports. I could not place it. The archive drawer at the back of the room had been forced. The lock was broken, the metal bent outward as though someone had pried it with a tool. Inside, the original 1967 survey notes were gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty drawer, and then I turned and walked back outside. Victoria was waiting at the shaft mouth. I walked past the 6 unresponsive crew members and joined her, and together we looked down at the figurines arranged on the ground. I counted them again. Slowly, carefully. I counted them twice to be sure. There were 208. Chero Yukai employed 208 people. I looked at Victoria. She was already looking at me. Her face was pale and drawn, and her jaw was set. I knew that look. I had seen it 100 times over 4 years. The sun was high now, past noon, the light flat and white. The 6 crew members stood motionless at the bore, their hands cupped around their figurines, their eyes open and empty. The 208 copper figures sat in their arc around the shaft mouth, radial engravings facing outward, as precise and deliberate as the parked convoy on the road. Neither of us looked away from the other's face. I went back to my desk first to retrieve the map cylinder. The drawer where I'd locked it that morning slid open without resistance, and the cylinder was exactly where I'd left it. Steel, pitted with the deep mineral staining that had accumulated over decades. I carried it to the operations room and set it on the table beside the annotated blueprints that were still spread across every available surface. The hand-drawn map from the cylinder was older, rougher in its execution, but when I laid it over the annotated blueprints, the geometry matched perfectly. Every angle, every measurement. The penciled corrections on the blueprints were more precise than anything I had produced myself in 4 years at this site. They were more precise, even, than the original survey data. I stood there looking at them for a long time, trying to work out who had done the annotations. It had to be one of the 6 skeleton crew members during their unresponsive interval, but the handwriting was steady and deliberate and showed no signs of haste or confusion. Whoever had made these corrections knew exactly what they were doing. The locked archive drawer at the back of the operations room was hanging open when I turned around. The lock was broken, not forced from the outside, but broken from the inside. The metal bent outward as though someone had pried it open from within the drawer itself. That didn't make sense, but I didn't have time to think about it. Inside the drawer were the original survey notes from 1967. I read them standing there, one hand still on the open drawer. The notes described the anomaly at 1,040 meters as a resonant cavity of unknown origin in the volcanic basement rock. It was large enough to register as a significant density anomaly on the survey equipment, a void, roughly circular, approximately 60 meters in diameter. The survey crews at depth had reported auditory phenomena during the initial exploration, a rhythmic vibration perceived as intentional by multiple independent witnesses. The word intentional was underlined twice. The survey recommended permanent avoidance and recorded no further investigation. Shaft 7 was bored to stop at 980 meters, 60 meters short of the cavity. I could see the decision in the notes, written in a careful hand at the bottom of the page. Bore termination approved by site supervisor. No objections from survey team. They had known it was there. They had mapped it, noted its location, and then spent 60 years making sure no one went near it. I took the 1967 notes to the table and laid them beside the annotated blueprints. The fracture propagation data on the blueprints was clear. Cracks extending downward from the collapse point, through the shaft floor, continuing past 980 meters. The annotated blueprints showed the fracture network reaching Nivel in a branching pattern that looked almost deliberate, as though the collapse had known exactly where to propagate. The detonation 4 days ago had not merely sealed the ventilation tunnel. It had opened the chamber the 1967 survey had spent 6 decades avoiding. I traced the fracture lines with my finger, following them down to the void at 1,040 meters, and tried to imagine what it looked like now. A chamber that had been sealed for however long, thousands of years, possibly longer, suddenly exposed to air and light and whatever else had traveled down the shaft in the days since the blast. The workers who had gone missing, the convoy that had turned around, the skeleton crew standing motionless at the shaft mouth. All of them connected to Nivel. I turned my attention to the geological substrate map printed in the corner of the original hand-drawn document. The volcanic basement rock formation, the same rock type, the same resonant cavity substrate as Nivel Cerro, did not stop at the shaft. It ran outward from Cerro Yucay in a branching network, northeast, southwest, and west under the salt pan. A continuous seam of the same formation, threading under the desert like roots. I traced it northeast with my finger and found the Salar Blanco lithium facility, 28 kilometers across open salt pan. A different operation, a different company, but sitting directly over the same substrate. Salar Blanco had a permanent security post. I knew that from the regional safety briefings we'd attended last year. The post was equipped with a hardwired radio relay, a landline system physically separate from Cerro Yucay's communications infrastructure. If the hardwired relay at Salar Blanco was functional, we could raise Kalama. Victoria was standing in the doorway when I looked up. She had her arms crossed and she was looking at the 6 skeleton crew members through the operations room window, still visible in the distance, standing at the shaft mouth in the late afternoon light. The 1967 notes say it's a resonant cavity, I told her. Unknown origin. The survey crews heard something at depth and recommended permanent avoidance. Shaft 7 was supposed to stop at 980 meters. They made sure it never reached Nivel Cerro. And the blast opened it, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She turned away from the window and looked at the map on the table. I pointed to Salar Blanco on the substrate map, explained about the hardwired relay, the landline system that might still be functional. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she nodded once. We can't take the truck, she said. The convoy on the road isn't an obstacle. It's a destination. 200 people walked away from those buses back toward the mine. If we drive, we'll end up the same way. She was right. I hadn't wanted to say it out loud, but she was correct. The access road led back to Shaft 7. Anyone who traveled it now was apparently redirected here, whether they wanted to be or not. We walk, I said. 28 kilometers across the salt pan, at night. The heat in daylight will kill us faster than the cold. Victoria went to the supply room and came back with 2 packs, 2 canteens, 2 headlamps. We filled the canteens from the water tank in the dormitory block, packed what food we could carry, energy bars, trail mix, a few cans of soup we could eat cold if we needed to. I rolled the annotated blueprints and secured them with a rubber band, slid the map cylinder into my pack. Victoria took the 1967 survey notes and folded them into her jacket pocket. Before we left, I went back to the shaft mouth to check the skeleton crew one more time. All 6 were still standing in their loose semicircle, facing the open bore. Their eyes were open. Their hands were cupped in front of them, each one holding a copper figurine. I checked their pulses, all 6 steady, all 6 breathing in the same slow, even rhythm. We couldn't move them. Victoria and I were not strong enough to physically carry 6 unresponsive adults across 28 kilometers of salt flat, and even if we were, I didn't know if moving them would help. The convoy had been full of people who left their vehicles and walked back here on their own. Taking the skeleton crew away from the shaft might not keep them safe. It might just mean they'd walk back while we weren't looking. I left them where they were. The arc of figurines on the ground around the shaft mouth was still perfectly arranged, 208 of them, 1 for every person employed at Cerro Yucay. I counted them again, just to be sure. The number hadn't changed. Victoria was waiting for me at the edge of the plateau, her pack already on, her headlamp switched off to conserve the battery. The sun was setting behind us, turning the sky over the Andes a deep orange that would fade to black within the hour. The salt pan to the northeast was already gray with shadow. I took one last look at the 6 crew members standing motionless at the shaft mouth, the arc of figurines on the ground around them, and then Victoria and I turned northeast and began walking into the dark. We walked northeast across the salt flat. The temperature dropped fast after dark. 40 degrees between noon and midnight in the Atacama, and we moved at a steady pace, conserving water, not talking much. The salt pan stretched out white and flat in every direction. At 3,200 meters, the stars were very bright. I carried the map cylinder and the rolled blueprints. Victoria carried the water. An hour out from camp, the ground began to vibrate. Not the micro-seismic noise I'd learned to filter out over 4 years on this plateau. That was stochastic, irregular, a background texture you stopped noticing after a while. This was rhythmic, a slow, regular pulse rising through the salt flat and into the soles of my boots. The same interval every time, patient and even. Victoria felt it at the same moment I did. She grabbed my arm. We looked at each other and then down at the ground, as though we might see something. We didn't. The salt pan was smooth and undisturbed, white in the starlight. We walked faster. The vibration continued beneath us, steady and unhurried, neither increasing nor fading. I counted the interval between pulses and found it consistent. Maybe 6 seconds, maybe 7. I timed it against my own heartbeat for a few minutes and then stopped doing that. It was a bad idea. The rhythm was too close to a natural cadence, too easy to mistake for something organic. We walked for hours. Victoria didn't say anything about the vibration, and neither did I. There wasn't much to say. We both felt it. We both knew what it meant, or didn't mean, or might mean. Talking about it wouldn't change the fact that we had 13 more kilometers to cross, and that turning back would put us at the Cerro Yucay shaft mouth at dawn, which was not where either of us wanted to be. The salt pan stayed empty. The stars turned overhead. My legs kept moving. At the 15-kilometer mark in full dark, Victoria stopped. I stopped beside her and followed her gaze. There was a copper figurine sitting upright on the salt flat directly in front of her. Not half buried by wind, not lying on its side, upright, on bare salt, as though placed there. It was 7 centimeters tall, the same size as all the others, the same seated posture, the same radial engravings on its surface, visible in the starlight. There were no footprints around it. The salt pan in every direction was smooth and unbroken. Victoria crouched and picked it up. I said, "Put it down." She held it for a moment. The engravings caught the light. I could see her thumb tracing the lines on its surface, the same way I'd traced them on Liam's figurine back at the camp. Then she set it down on the salt flat, upright, in the same position she'd found it. We looked at each other. Her face was hard to read in the dark. I didn't know what mine looked like. Probably the same. We walked. The remaining 13 kilometers passed in silence. The vibration in the ground did not stop. The desert stayed empty. We didn't speak about the figurine or about what it meant that it was there, upright, with no tracks, at the exact midpoint of a route we decided to take only hours before. I thought about it, though. I thought about it the entire time. The figurine had been placed there, not dropped, not buried and exposed by wind, not kicked aside by an animal. Placed, upright, centered in our path, and there were no footprints, no boot marks in the salt, no disturbance in the crust, nothing to indicate that anyone had walked out to that spot and left it there. Which meant it had been there for a long time, long enough for the wind to smooth out any tracks, or it meant something else had put it there. I didn't let myself finish that thought. We kept walking. The stars turned. The vibration pulsed beneath us, steady and patient, and I tried not to think about how it felt like something waiting for us to arrive, waiting for us to understand. The concrete block outline of the Salar Blanco security post appeared against the pre-dawn sky ahead of us, a light on inside and a diesel generator running outside, and Victoria and I stopped walking for a moment and looked at it. The Salar Blanco security post was the kind of building you could miss if you weren't looking for it. A concrete block structure, maybe 4 meters by 6, with a corrugated metal roof and a diesel generator rattling outside. The light was on inside when we reached it at dawn. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and the hinges made a sound like a wounded animal. The security guard was at the desk. The roster posted beside the door said his name was Lopez, Dominic Lopez. He was seated upright in a metal folding chair, breathing, eyes open, looking at nothing. In each hand he held a copper figurine, the same size and shape as all the others, the radial engravings catching the light from the overhead bulb. I said his name. He didn't respond. Victoria moved past me into the room, checking his pulse at the wrist without trying to take the figurines from his hands. She looked at me and nodded once. Alive. The hardwired radio on the desk was on. The handset sat in its cradle with a strip of electrical tape holding the transmit button down, broadcasting a continuous carrier tone into the open frequency. The transmission counter on the unit showed 60 hours. I looked at that number for a long time. The Cerro Yucay collapse had been 4 days ago. Dominic Lopez had keyed that radio down before the collapse happened, before there was any reason to broadcast an emergency signal from this location, before anyone from Cerro Yucay could have walked 28 kilometers across the salt pan to reach this post. I pulled the tape off the handset and lifted it from the cradle. The carrier tone cut out and the frequency went quiet, just the faint hiss of static filling the silence. I keyed the transmit button. "This is Tony Gonzalez, Cerro Yucay Mine, calling Calama Mining Authority dispatch. Does anyone copy?" I waited. The static continued. Then a voice came through, thin and controlled, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has been awake for too many hours, managing a situation they don't fully understand. "This is Calama dispatch. We copy. Go ahead." I told him where we were. I told him we needed immediate assistance. I told him the hardwired relay at Salar Blanco was functional and that we could coordinate from this location. There was a pause on the other end. Then the dispatcher said, very carefully, that a regional emergency was active. Multiple mine sites across the Atacama had reported communication failure and missing workers. Cerro Yucay was not isolated. This was not one event. Victoria was spreading the geological substrate map on the desk beside the radio, smoothing it flat with her palms. I watched her trace the volcanic basement rock formation with her finger, starting from Nivel Cerro and moving outward under the salt pan, branching northeast, southwest, west. She traced it to Salar Blanco. She traced it to 4 other active mine sites marked on the map. She traced it all the way to Calama itself. The dispatcher was saying something about a geotechnical coordinator who had been briefed on the other sites, and that he was patching me through. The line clicked and went silent for a moment. Then a new voice came on. "This is Julian Valdez, Emergency Coordination. I'm listening. Go ahead." His voice was measured and formal, the voice of someone used to synthesizing data from multiple sources and making decisions based on incomplete information. I told him about the figurines. I told him about the map from the cylinder, the 1967 survey, Nivel Cerro, the fracture propagation from the blast 4 days ago. I told him about the annotated blueprints in the operations room at Cerro Yucay, the corrections more precise than the original survey data, the notation at the bottom of every sheet reading 1,040 meters, open now. I told him about the convoy on the road, the logbook entry in the driver's handwriting that said, "Nivel Cerro, I hear it, we're going back." I told him about the figurine on the salt flat 15 kilometers from the mine with no footprints around it. I told him there were 208 figurines at the shaft mouth, and that 208 was the exact number of people who worked at Cerro Yucay. I told him all of it. Valdez listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end, just the faint hiss of the open frequency. Then he said, "Our working theory is mass hypoxia, volcanic outgassing from geothermal activity in the substrate, producing a hallucinogenic gas event across multiple sites simultaneously. It accounts for the behavioral symptoms we're seeing. It's wrong, I said. Another pause. Then he said, a military engineering team has already been scrambled to Cerro Yucai with a bore sealing kit. High-pressure expanding foam injection, the system used to seal mine voids after structural collapse. They can seal Shaft 7 from the surface down within hours of arrival. I closed my eyes. I could see the bore geometry in my head, the lateral drift tunnels at 350 and 580 meters. That won't work, I said. The bore geometry of Shaft 7, specifically the lateral drift tunnels at 350 and 580 meters, will bleed pressure. The payload won't reach the shaft floor under sufficient pressure to seal a void 60 meters below it. The only way to seal Nivel Cerro is to drop the injection payload directly into the exposed chamber, which means sending someone down the shaft to 1,040 meters with the payload unit. I heard Victoria moving behind me. When I turned around, she had the operations harness from the security post's emergency kit in her hands, the standard rope descent equipment mounted on the wall beside the door, and she was putting it on with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it many times. I'll go, I said. She looked at me without stopping what she was doing. I'm the trained rope descent specialist on this site, she said. You're the engineer. The engineer stays on the radio and talks the rescue team in. She was correct. She had 3 years of rope descent certification, and I had none. The argument I wanted to make, that I should go because I couldn't stand to watch her go, wasn't an argument. It was a feeling, and feelings didn't change shaft geometry. I said nothing. Valdez was still on the line, saying something about deployment timelines and logistics. I told him we would be ready to coordinate when the team arrived. Then I gave him the radio frequency and the coordinates for the Salar Blanco post and told him I would remain here as surface coordinator. The line went quiet again. Then Valdez said, Understood. The team will be on site within 4 hours. Stand by. The frequency clicked off. Victoria finished buckling the harness and stood there for a moment, looking at the map on the desk. Then she looked at me. You stay on this radio, she said. You don't leave it for any reason. When they call in, you answer. Understood. Understood, I said. She nodded once, then turned and walked out the door into the dawn light. I stood there alone in the concrete room with Dominic Lopez seated at the desk behind me, breathing, eyes open, holding the figurines in his hands. The generator outside continued its low rattle. The overhead bulb flickered once and then steadied. I sat down at the desk and waited. The military team arrived at Cerro Yucai 4 hours later. The radio crackled to life and a new voice came on, clipped and professional, identifying himself as the team leader. I talked them through the bore geometry, the fracture propagation map, the location of the lateral drift tunnels at 350 and 580 meters, the service platform positions at 200, 400, 600, and 800 meters. I told them what they would find at the shaft mouth. There was a long silence on the other end. Then the team leader came back on, his voice very quiet. We've counted them, he said. He didn't say how many. Victoria's voice came through the radio 20 minutes later. She was at the shaft mouth, suited up, the injection payload unit secured to her harness. The team was ready to begin descent. I confirmed the protocol with the team leader, talking him through the pressure monitoring equipment, the cable load indicators, the check-in intervals at each service platform. Then Victoria began her descent. She checked in at 200 meters. Her voice was steady and clear, and she noted, without elaboration, that the rock wall at the service platform was warm. Not the warmth of sun-heated stone, warm from inside. She checked in at 400 meters. At 600 meters. At 800 meters, her voice was still steady, and she said the vibration was stronger at depth, that she could feel it in the harness cable, that it wasn't unpleasant, and that she was continuing descent. Then the radio went silent. Not static, not interference. The same silence as the satellite phone back at Cerro Yucay. The carrier signal present. The system functional. Nothing coming through. I stood at the desk with the handset pressed to my ear and said her name into it. Victoria. Nothing. Victoria, do you copy? Nothing. I keyed the transmit button again and again, saying her name, and the silence on the other end was complete. The team leader came on. His voice was calm and professional, and he said the descent cable was still under load. She was still on it, still at depth. The cable hadn't gone slack. He said they were waiting. I told him to maintain position and keep monitoring the cable. Then I put the handset down on the desk and pressed my palms flat against the concrete surface and tried to breathe. 40 minutes passed. I counted them on the wall clock above the desk, watching the second hand move in its slow circle, each rotation taking longer than the last. Then the team leader came back on the radio. Surface monitoring equipment at the shaft mouth had registered a pressure change at depth, a pressure spike at the 1,040-meter mark, consistent with the injection payload deploying, followed by rapid pressure equalization as the expanding foam filled the void. I felt it through my boot soles before he said it. The vibration in the salt flat, the low, rhythmic pulse that had been rising through the concrete floor of the security post for the last 4 hours, stopped. It didn't fade gradually. It stopped all at once. The team leader came back on.
The void is sealed,
he said. There was a pause. Then he said very quietly,
the cable is slack.
I stood at the desk in the Salar Blanco security post with the handset pressed to my ear, and the silence of the open frequency filling the room, the vibration gone from the floor beneath me, and I did not put the handset down. The helicopter came for me on Friday afternoon. I was still standing at the desk in the Salar Blanco security post with the radio handset in my hand when I heard the rotors. The military team leader had told me to wait there, that they were sending transport. I put the handset down and walked outside into the sun. The pilot didn't say much during the flight back to Cerro Yucay. I sat in the back seat with my pack between my feet and watched the salt flat pass below us, white and flat and empty all the way to the horizon. From the air, you could see the line we'd walked, 2 sets of boot prints cutting northeast across the pan, dark against the white. Just ours, no one else's. When we reached the mine, the helicopter circled once before landing. I could see the shaft mouth from above. The military team had set up a perimeter around it with orange cones and caution tape, the kind you see at road construction sites. The skeleton crew members were gone, loaded into a medical transport truck, the team leader told me later. The figurines were still there. I counted them from the air. 208, arranged in a perfect semicircle. They landed the helicopter on the plateau near the dormitory blocks and I got out. The team leader met me there. His name was Vargas. He was maybe 50, with gray hair, and the kind of face that doesn't give anything away. We searched for 6 hours, he said. Camera equipment, the whole shaft. We went as deep as we could before the wall integrity became unsafe. I nodded. I already knew what he was going to say. We didn't find her, Vargas said. The descent cable was intact. No signs of breakage or failure. It was just unclipped. I looked past him toward the shaft mouth. The caution tape was fluttering in the wind. The report will say that, Vargas continued, that the cable was unclipped. We don't know how, we don't know why, but that's what the evidence shows. I didn't ask if they were going to keep looking. I could see it in his face that they weren't. Thank you, I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Vargas nodded and walked back toward the perimeter. I stood there for a while, looking at the shaft mouth, and then I went to the dormitory block to collect my things. Over the next week, they recovered the workers. All of them. 200 people from the convoy on the road, the 6 skeleton crew members from the shaft mouth, workers from the other affected mine sites across the Atacama, all alive, all presenting the same unresponsive state, breathing, eyes open, not responding to their names or to being touched. They loaded them into medical transports and took them to hospitals in Calama and Antofagasta and Copiapó. I was in Santiago by then, staying in a hotel near the mining authority's central office while they debriefed me. The debrief took 3 days. Different people asking the same questions in different ways. What did you see? What did you hear? What did the map show? What did the figurines look like? How many were there? When did the vibration start? When did it stop? I answered everything. I showed them the photographs on my phone. I gave them the map cylinder and the annotated blueprints. I told them about the 1967 survey and the resonant cavity at 140 meters and the fracture propagation from the collapse. I told them about the convoy logbook and what it said. I told them about the figurine on the salt flat with no footprints around it. They listened. They took notes. They didn't tell me what they thought any of it meant. On the 5th day after the extraction, I got a call from the hospital in Antofagasta. They told me Liam Kim had woken up. They said he was asking for someone from Cerro Yucay. I told them I'd come. I drove up the next morning. It took 6 hours. The hospital was a concrete block building on the south side of the city, near the port. I found Liam in a recovery ward on the 3rd floor. He was sitting up in bed with a nurse taking his blood pressure. The first thing he said when he saw me was, "I need to give it back." The nurse looked at me. I looked at Liam. "Give what back?" I asked. Liam looked down at his hands. They were empty. He stared at them for a long time, turning them over, looking at his palms, and then the backs of his hands. "I don't know," he said finally. He didn't say anything else. I stayed for another 20 minutes, but he just kept looking at his hands. The nurse told me he'd been like that since he woke up. Confused, disoriented, asking for something he couldn't name. She said the doctors thought it would pass. I drove back to Santiago that afternoon. On the way, I listened to the radio. There was a news report about the mine closures. Multiple sites across the Atacama shut down permanently due to structural failures. They didn't mention Cerro Yucay by name. They didn't mention the workers or the figurines or anything about what had actually happened. Just structural failures, routine safety measures, nothing to worry about. The military team cataloged the figurines. Vargas sent me the report a week later. 208 at the shaft mouth, like I'd counted, and another 1,400 recovered from below. From the service platforms at 200 and 400 and 600 meters, from the drift tunnels, from the processing cavern, all the way down to the collapsed shaft floor at 980 meters, arranged in layers, the report said, descending layers, all of them upright, all of them identical, all of them placed with the same precision as the one we'd found on the salt flat. The catalog ran to 11 pages. I read it twice. Then I filed it away and didn't look at it again. Cerro Yucay was closed permanently. The official reason given was structural integrity failure following the detonation collapse. Nobody questioned it. The other affected sites were closed for the same reason. The workers were released from the hospitals after psychiatric observation and sent home. The diagnosis was dissociative episode consistent with acute hypoxic hallucination, mass hysteria brought on by volcanic outgassing. It was a coherent explanation. It accounted for everything in a way that didn't require anyone to believe something they couldn't explain. I was offered a desk job at the mining authority's central office in Santiago. Environmental compliance reports, reading applications, cross-referencing data, writing summaries. I accepted it without asking any questions. My supervisor didn't ask why I wasn't going back to field work. Maybe he already knew. Maybe Vargas had told him something, or maybe he'd just read the debrief transcripts and put it together himself. Either way, he didn't bring it up. The work was easier than I expected. I'd thought sitting at a desk all day would feel like a kind of death after 19 years in the field, but it didn't. The office was quiet. The reports were clear and straightforward. The numbers added up or they didn't. Nobody's life depended on whether I caught an error in the third column of page 7. The silence, which I'd always thought of as a deprivation, felt like something I needed now. I read compliance reports. I checked data against regulatory standards. I signed off on environmental impact assessments. Outside my office window, the city went about its afternoon. Cars in the street, people on the sidewalks, the low hum of Santiago in the middle of a weekday. Inside, the office stayed quiet around me. I didn't think about the shaft. I didn't think about the figurines or the map or the vibration in the salt flat. I didn't think about Victoria descending into the dark with the injection payload, or the radio going silent, or the way the team leader's voice had sounded when he told me the cable was slack. I just read the reports, one after another, page by page. The numbers said the operations were compliant, or they weren't. I trusted the numbers. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, 14 months after Cerro Yucay closed. I was at my desk in the mining authority's central office in Santiago, reviewing environmental compliance reports for lithium extraction sites in the second region, when the mail clerk dropped it in my inbox. It was padded, the kind used for sending documents you don't want creased, and it had been postmarked from Calama. There was no return address. I set it aside and finished the paragraph I was reading. The report detailed groundwater contamination levels at a brine pool operation near the Salar de Atacama. The numbers were within acceptable limits. I signed off on it and moved to the next one in the stack. The envelope sat there for maybe 20 minutes before I opened it. Inside was a copper figurine, 7 centimeters tall, seated, with radial lines engraved across its surface, and a folded sheet of paper. I knew what the figurine was the moment I saw it. I had counted 208 of them arranged in a semicircle around the mouth of Shaft 7, and I had held one in my hand at the Salar Blanco security post, while Victoria descended into the dark with the injection payload unit. I had not expected to see another one. I had not expected anything from Cerro Yucay to follow me here. I unfolded the paper. It was a geological substrate map, newer than the one I had pulled from the cylinder at the shaft mouth, produced with modern survey equipment, the kind that gives you precision down to the meter. The contour lines were clean and exact in a way the 1967 document had never been. It showed the volcanic basement rock formation extending far beyond any existing geological chart I had ever seen, north under the Bolivian Altiplano, east into Argentina, west toward the Pacific coast. New sections of the formation were circled in red. Each circle had a depth measurement written beside it in a careful hand, followed by a question mark. The circles were spread across hundreds of kilometers of substrate. I counted them twice. There were 11. The handwriting on the annotations was familiar. I had been looking at it for weeks during the investigation, on the corrected blueprints spread across the operations room table at Cerro Yucay, at the bottom of every sheet in the same neat script. The words that had been written there, over and over. 1,040 meters, open now. I had assumed it belonged to one of the skeleton crew members during their unresponsive interval. Maybe Liam, or one of the others who had stood at the shaft mouth with copper figurines cupped in their hands. I had never matched it to a specific person because the handwriting analysis had not been a priority for the investigators. They had been focused on the geological survey data, on the mass hypoxia theory, on the structural integrity failure that had given them a reason to close the mine and move on. I recognized it now. I had been reading my own handwriting for 42 years. I sat at my desk with the map in front of me and the figurine beside it and did not move for a long time. Outside the window, Santiago went about its afternoon. The traffic noise from the street below was a low hum, steady and ordinary. Inside, in the silence of my cubicle, I became aware of something I had not noticed before. Or maybe I had noticed it and dismissed it. A sensation in the soles of my feet, faint, regular, rising up through the building's concrete foundation. Patient, even. The same interval I had counted on the salt flat, standing in the dark with Victoria beside me and the copper figurine upright on the smooth white salt with no footprints around it. I sat very still and felt it. One pulse, then another, the same rhythm, the same patient, deliberate spacing. It was not the stochastic noise of traffic or construction or the building settling. It was not random. It was intentional. It had been there the whole time. I looked at the map spread open in front of me. 11 circled sites, each one marked with a depth measurement and a question mark, each one waiting. I looked at the copper figurine beside it, the radial lines engraved across its surface catching the fluorescent light from the ceiling. I looked at my own handwriting. The vibration rose through the concrete floor into the soles of my feet, patient, even, waiting for me to stop explaining it away.